Hello there, and thanks for joining us for our 16th episode of the GrowVC Everyone Funding Startups podcast. I'm your host, Markus. As Jouko and Valto are traveling India, and we have an apparent global flu outbreak going on, we had to rearrange our podcast schedule a bit. So today we're joined by our own user experience wizard, Chris. And I'll let Chris introduce himself to our audience.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Christoffer Langenskiold, and I am the Chief Experience Officer at GrowVC. Basically, I've been jumping from user interface design to concept design, and including this then means web design and programming and user research. But nowadays, most of the time working on, obviously, GrowVC.
And thanks, Chris, for joining us today.
Yes, thank you.
And our member highlight from the community this week is a startup called HopeVote. The startup is quite unique in many ways and seems to have caught on with the public already quite well. HopeVote turns Amazon shoppers into a fundraiser for non-profits and schools. To participate in the fundraiser, shoppers simply navigate to hopevote.com, where a special link takes them to the Amazon.com shop. And any purchases they make after following this link will include a set percentage of the total purchase that goes towards the fundraiser. So truly a free fundraiser for good causes with an interesting angle. We will definitely keep tabs on what the future has in store for them through our community. And let's move over to our topic for this episode, user experience and its importance. And let's start at the very core. Chris, what do you think user experience is all about?
To begin with, I would say that, it's broken down into two words, user experience. And I think the main issue here is the user, obviously, and having a strong focus on who the user obviously is and where he is from, and meaning culturally and location and the context. So user experience is a field, obviously, which has risen in hype nowadays, and the obviously focus of user experience is the user himself or herself, and the importance of this is obviously to have a proper understanding of who the user is and where he is from, and this is strongly linked to obviously interaction design and information architecture. Once designing a service or website or product, basically, user experience it's all about understanding for whom you're designing something and keeping in mind what the user really needs. Not always is it about what he wants, because he sometimes obviously isn't really aware of what he really needs. So that is not always in line, which is quite interesting. But what I think is really the main point with this now is somehow being able to put yourself into the user's shoes and get into his mental models and try to understand how he's thinking and seeing things. And yes, I think this is like what user experience is about.
So basically you need to be a psychologist as well, not just a designer, but you have to get into people's minds.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a nice crossover of visual design, because obviously there's a cognitive part of this, and so having some sort of information architecture, meaning maybe more like an engineering point of view, meaning really thinking of how information makes most sense in organization-wise or architecture-wise, and the psychology part, exactly.
What does information architecture actually mean?
Our information architecture is basically how you have different information inside if we're taking a website, for example.
Yeah.
And you have different pages, or like, let's say now if we're taking, for example, GrowVC, like now the easiest example maybe for everybody. We have startups, people, and these are, let's say, organized, meaning if we're thinking about website sitemap. So who falls under these people, meaning there's entrepreneurs, investors or funders, and experts. And then startups, obviously, then there's startups, but then they'll still fall under different categories. And this is the organization of basically how all this information is organized. This is what information architecture is about.
Talking about visual design, so how important is good visual design, and what are the consequences for the user when he or she experiences this?
Visual design obviously is something that sells a product, and sometimes it even makes people forgive a product, even though usability isn't where it should be. But so it is really important point, and I think if there would be, let's say, if the visual design is not there, there can be, let's say, some sort of cognitive load for the user, for the client or the customer. And such cognitive load basically can make it a little bit more harder for the user to process different, or to have a proper flow. So it's kind of like slowing him down in a way. And that can become frustrating also. But obviously it depends on the target group also, because people are not always grown up necessarily with this aesthetic. If we call good visual design, if we call that aesthetics, some people maybe have not grown up or learned how to maybe really notice the difference between these. And more people can also become obviously blind and not being affected by that. So it depends, I think, on the target group whether that is very important or not important. It depends on the target group, yeah.
Yeah, I think this goes kind of into the next question that we prepared. There's several companies that have very, very complicated and messy homepages, for example, and I could name a couple, but I'm not going to. But they still seem to be very successful. So how's that possible? And can you actually do well with bad usability?
Obviously, the usability is something that has been, well, it's been around for a few decades now, but still, I would say that it's still relatively new considering to these technologies that we are having. And since the technology has been earlier on the bottleneck, so in this human-computer interface or interaction, and now that the technology has somehow not become a bottleneck anymore, the usability has been the one, because that hasn't been an issue earlier, so people haven't had to think too much about that. And obviously, people have their own mental models, and they have been using these technologies for a long time, and there hasn't been such good usability, and people just learn how to struggle with it. So, also, I mean, certain websites, as you mentioned, can be complicated, but that I think also isn't always bad in a sense, because it depends also on culture and values. In certain cultures, for instance, complicated is actually a good thing, and simplicity doesn't always go or a synonym of usability either. So I think usability or complexity is not necessarily linked with usability, as long as it's efficient and user friendly enough and intuitive. But it's maybe complexity is maybe most often, let's say, linked to power user, advanced user tools or something like that.
Okay, I wanted to ask you about your thesis, since I know you wrote it on, what was it, mobile user data and emotions. So
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about that and what you found in your research?
Well, to begin with, I found that there's not much done on this, so it was a big literature study and a lot of reading, and try to come up with something, because most of emotions, the way they have been recognized until now, has been mostly with physiological signals or data, in the sense of whether that's facial expression or in the voice, or user text also has been used to recognize emotion, but that's not exactly what I was looking into, because it was more around user behavior. So I was not looking into the content. But so there was not much at all on this user behavior, or at least the digital behavior somehow, that is left into the digital footprint. So yeah, lots to read, and the findings were that emotional states or these emotions, they actually